Two men in tactical gear stormed Brian Keller's porch, barking orders like they were SWAT, demanding he step outside to face HOA enforcement. No badges, no cruisers, just bluff and menace. But instead of retreating, Brian calmly reached into his coat, flipped open a leather case, and revealed something that made them freeze mid-step. Something real. Their confidence evaporated. One stammered, the other ran. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Brian stood in the center of his tile foyer, hand resting on the doorknob, eyes narrowed. The voices outside were too smooth, too scripted. He knew the rhythm of real authority, had spent 2 decades dissecting it in satellite footage and encrypted voice packets. This wasn't it. The morning had started like any other. Coffee, emails, noise-canceling headset on, breaking down a ransomware strain that had taken a mid-sized logistics firm hostage. Then came the knock. Sharp, rapid, intentional. Not a package drop. Not a neighbor. He muted the call, stood, and looked through the peephole. 2 men. Dark gray tactical jackets. Clean boots that hadn't walked a real beat in years. One tall, built like he spent more time in mirrors than in a gym. The other wiry, shifting weight from foot to foot like he wanted to be somewhere else. Both had cheap radios clipped to their shoulders and armbands with a logo that looked close enough to an official seal to fool the inattentive. But not Brian. He didn't open the door. Instead, he watched through the security cam app on his phone, listening as they tried to project calm authority. "You need to step outside, sir," said the tall one, voice laced with faux patience. "We're authorized to detain you for non-compliance." Brian snorted under his breath. Non-compliance was the HOA's favorite word lately, used for everything from unmowed lawns to unauthorized seasonal displays. He'd received his first fine in February for a mailbox that leaned 3 degrees off vertical. The second came weeks later for his storm hatch, installed a decade earlier, signed off by county engineers. The third had been the last straw, a notice threatening legal action over unapproved perimeter landscaping, meaning 2 lavender bushes that hadn't existed when the new president, Karen Delaney, took over. Still, this wasn't about shrubs. This was about power, about control, about making people bow because they were told to. Brian didn't bow. He unlocked the deadbolt, slowly cracked the door, just enough to let air and tension meet, and locked eyes with the man on the left. "Authorized by who?" The man blinked. Didn't answer, just adjusted the strap of his clipboard, took 1 step closer, and let silence do the talking. Behind Brian, on the kitchen counter, sat a leather case. Black, worn, embossed with a gold eagle that meant something. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. But he was close. Because some men play cop for power, and others, real ones, wait just long enough to expose the difference. Brian stepped into the sunlight with the precision of a man who'd been trained to assess threats before the average person could spot a shadow. He didn't slam the door open, didn't posture. He simply made himself visible. Center mass aligned, stance firm, eyes locked. "You're not law enforcement," he said. "You're trespassing." No raised voice, no theatrics. Just enough steel to make a hammer ring in the chest of anyone halfway aware of the line they were crossing. That should have been the end of it. But the shorter one twitched. Brian's gaze dropped, tracking the subtle motion as the man's hand slid toward the side of his belt. Not a holster, just a plastic loop of zip-tie cuffs, cheap, but functional. The kind wannabes use when they think intimidation matters more than legality. Brian didn't blink. He reached into his jacket pocket, slow and deliberate, and pulled out the black leather ID case. The leather creaked slightly as he flipped it open, exposing the shield and laminate, the gold eagle crest catching the light like a scalpel. Homeland Security. Federal clearance. real credentials. "I suggest you back up," Brian said, each syllable sharpened to a blade's edge. The effect was immediate. The taller man's chin snapped forward, eyes narrowing as he tried to parse what he was looking at. His mouth opened slightly, as if hoping words would come before consequences did. The shorter one stepped back. We were just following HOA procedure," the tall one stammered, like the phrase might conjure a shield of bureaucratic immunity. Brian took a step forward, just one, and let the silence stretch like taut wire. "This is not a lawful action," he said, "and I suggest you start running before I call someone who doesn't carry a clipboard. They carry federal charges." That was all it took. The illusion cracked. Whatever script they'd rehearsed in some HOA storage unit evaporated in the heat of real authority. They turned, fast and clumsy, stumbling over their own boots as they dashed down the sidewalk, past hedges, mailboxes, and neighbors who'd peeked through blinds just moments too late. Brian didn't follow. He watched until they disappeared, then turned on his heel, stepped inside, and closed the door with a click that sounded like finality. At the kitchen counter, he picked up his phone, scrolled to County Sheriff, direct. He knew exactly what to say, and more importantly, he knew the law would be on his side this time. The fallout didn't arrive with sirens. It came with silence, emails sent, calls returned, names quietly added to lists that suddenly mattered. Within 2 days, the county sheriff's office opened a formal inquiry into the Willow Ridge HOA. And at the center of it all sat Karen Delaney, manicured and rattled, trying to explain how 2 unlicensed, unverified men ended up on neighborhood porches acting like paramilitary rent-a-cops. The truth unfolded fast. The uniforms came from a site that also sold airsoft gear and tactical cosplay kits. The men themselves, one with a domestic disturbance on record, the other previously fined for impersonating a code enforcement officer in Arizona, were never vetted. They were hired directly by Karen. No board vote, no paperwork trail. Just a private enforcement agreement paid through discretionary HOA funds. Neighbors who'd once kept their heads down started stepping forward. Mr. Jenkins, 72 and long retired from the Postal Service, gave his statement in a firm voice despite shaking hands. "They told me my tool shed violated code, said they could confiscate it if I didn't comply. It's been there since 1984. Then came Ashley Rivera, mother of 2, holding her toddler on one hip while recounting how one of the officers filmed her backyard without permission during a supposed compliance check. "He didn't even announce himself," she said, eyes tight. "Just aimed his phone over the fence." By the time the sheriff's department reviewed Brian's footage, doorbell cam, security angles, and yes, a high-res still from a badge cam he installed on his front entry, it was no longer just a homeowner complaint. It was a pattern. A deliberate abuse of authority under the guise of neighborhood order. Karen showed up to the emergency HOA meeting with a file folder and trembling fingers. She blamed bad intel, claimed the board misunderstood the contract. "We thought they were licensed contractors," she said, too polished, too rehearsed. But Brian Keller didn't flinch. He stood in front of 24 residents in a folding chair circle under the rec center's buzzing lights. No drama, no raised voice, just facts. He laid out the chain of events, displayed printed screenshots, detailed each false claim, and ended with a question that hung in the stale air. "If we let this go, what comes next?" No one answered, but every face in the room wore the same expression: tired, angry, and finally aware. The illusion had shattered. Now it was time to rebuild. It didn't take long for the dam to break once the truth came out. The board folded quietly under pressure. No drama, no resistance. Just a terse email announcement that Karen Delaney had resigned and that the HOA structure would undergo administrative restructuring. But everyone in Willow Ridge knew what that really meant. The reign was over. A week later, folding chairs circled in the community center once more, this time for a very different kind of meeting. No security guards, no Robert's Rules of Order, just residents, young couples, retired veterans, single parents, speaking without fear of fines or threats. And from that meeting came something the neighborhood hadn't seen in years: trust. The new committee wasn't flashy, no corporate buzzwords or printed pamphlets, just 5 volunteers with common sense and shared frustration, elected with a show of hands and a collective sigh of relief. They asked Brian Keller to lead. He declined without hesitation. "I've done my service," he said with a quiet smile. "I'm not looking to run anything. Just want to live where nobody gets fined for flying the flag or told their shed is a compliance hazard." Still, he didn't disappear. Brian offered to train the new board, gave a crash course in real legal boundaries, the limits of HOA authority, the difference between enforcement and intimidation. He spoke at the next town council meeting about the rise of impersonators in uniform and the ease with which fear can be manufactured. Then he wrote it all down. A homeowner's guide, spotting fake compliance officers and knowing your rights. Clear, simple, no nonsense. It took off like wildfire, shared in veteran forums, neighborhood apps, even mentioned in a morning segment on local TV. Neighbors who once kept their eyes down now raised their hands in meetings. They asked questions. They expected answers. And when Brian walked the street, usually just headed to the mailbox or clearing the sidewalk, people waved. Some stopped to talk. Others just nodded, grateful. A few left handwritten notes tucked under his doormat. "Thanks for standing up for us." But Brian never saw it as heroism. It was a matter of principle. Because systems that rely on fear don't collapse from noise. They collapse when someone stands, quiet and unshaking, and says, "That's enough." Not for glory, not for revenge, just for the simple, powerful truth that no one should have to fear their own front porch.